You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us. Hello from beautiful New England. I'm Annie from the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. The podcast by two online friends who never met in real life.
It's true. We've never met each other or any of you. Well, most of you. Anyhow, before we start, we'd like to thank our newest Patreon members. We know that there was not much going on in August. It was a little bit of a hectic vacation month, but we're going to be back in September with another get-together and maybe a game night if we have Patreons who would be interested in trying to do that again. We did make a post on Patreon, so please go and check that out when you have a moment.
For everything else, please listen until the end of the episode. That's when we'll give you all the logistics of the podcast. What are we talking about today? As I told you before, Annie and I are friends who have never met. If you listen to our podcast from the beginning, you know all about it. Basically, you got to know us better each week, just like Annie and I got to know each other better each week. And our friendship grew and deepened, and you were witness to it. Now, one could say that's an unusual friendship in a way.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think so. And because of that, and because of something that happened in the news this week that made international news and was kind of an important news topic for both Johanna and I, we were sort of like, oh, so we decided we wanted to talk about it on the show. This isn't really what we usually talk about, though, is it? We're taking a little kind of a sidebar, and we're going to talk about some unusual friendships today. And if you know us, you might have already guessed, this means animals. We're going to talk about some interspecies friendships because there are some pretty unusual ones, and they are all incredibly heartwarming. And I'm hoping we get some good listener stories from this episode, actually. I love listener stories.
Yeah. It's 3 interspecies and 1 same species friendship.
Yes.
Relationship. Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't worry, we won't be talking about Hachiko.
No.
Because it's been almost 2 decades that we all heard about that story, and I still tear up whenever I think about that dog, so there's no way I want to get into that.
Nope. No.
We know many of our listeners had a bit of a rough month. Diane, for example, we send you all the good vibes and hope you feel better soon.
Yes.
And because August took a toll on many, we thought we need something good. Something to warm our heart. Chicken soup for the soul, so to say.
Yeah.
But quick warning, there might be some tears involved with the last story that I'm going to tell you today.
Yeah.
Be warned. This might be unofficially called, I don't know, Fresh Delight podcast, maybe.
That sounds like, Fresh Delight sounds a little bit like that thing on the Chinese food menu, and you're like, oh, that sounds nice, but there's no explanation for what it is. Yeah.
I thought more like Fresh Bakery.
Fresh Bakery. Poppin' fresh dough. This is... Okay, it's fine.
Like some croissant or something like that. Before we start today, we also need to put a bit of a damper on it all. That's also what we do over here.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things we need to address beforehand. First of all, I want to quickly talk about something we all do, often without even realizing it.
Not me. Not me with my dog, who is absolutely my hysterectomy puppy and a replacement for the child I could never have. What? All right, let's talk about it. We're not judging. We want to be clear. I am the queen of anthropomorphism, so here we go.
Anthropomorphism. So what is it? It's a big word that I struggle with, and it simply means giving human traits, emotions, or intentions to non-human living beings, entities like animals, sometimes even non-living things like objects or even the weather. Think about how often we say, my dog looks guilty, for example, or my cat looks guilty, or that bird is brave. It's natural for us to relate to the world this way, but here's the catch. Thinking this way can actually lead to misunderstandings, very skewed science, and even harm to the animals we care about. All animals have their own ways of communicating and interpreting the world. which are often, very different from ours. Same goes for emotions, affections, love. And in an episode where we will be going to talk about interspecies friendships, it's important to not forget that animals don't necessarily feel emotions in the same way we do. That doesn't mean that they don't have emotions. That doesn't mean that they don't love us in their way. Thank God nowadays we do know and we do understand that animals are thinking and feeling living creatures. It wasn't always like that. And it also doesn't mean that we think animals are less than. I think everyone who listens to us knows that. That's not at all what we think. But anthropomorphism can lead to very poor decisions in how we care for all kinds of animals. And it's often a case of us putting our own human preferences onto animals without considering what they might actually need or want.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not just in our day-to-day interactions where this can be an issue. Anthropomorphism can also really skew scientific research. Scientists, of course, strive for objectivity when studying animals, but if they start interpreting animal behavior through a human lens, it can lead to biased conclusions. Imagine trying to study how a predator hunts its prey, but instead of focusing on the animal's instinctual behavior, you start to think of it as being cruel or evil, just like a villain in a movie. That's anthropomorphism creeping in and clouding our judgment. Then there are ethical implications. When we assign human-like intentions to animals, it can blur the lines between human and animal rights. For example, we might feel uncomfortable with the idea of predators hunting because it seems cruel by human standards. But in nature, that's how healthy ecosystems function. Every animal plays a role, and if we start applying human morality to these natural behaviors, we risk making decisions that could really disrupt entire ecosystems. And when it comes to saving species, anthropomorphism can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it helps us connect with animals, especially the charismatic and cute ones, right? Think pandas, dolphins, elephants. But this can also lead to a situation where we focus too much on saving the animals that we find relatable and cute, rather than those that are equally crucial to their ecosystems but aren't as cute. I mean, if great white sharks had no teeth and just swam up and booped people on occasion, everyone would be like, I had the most amazing encounter booping a great white shark. But they just happen to have razor-sharp teeth as their way to investigate you. It just is what it is. And if you know me personally and you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, I know for a fact Annie doesn't watch nature programs because she cries whenever something is being hunted or eaten. And she also cries if there's no hunting available, and so everybody's starving to death. And you are right. I am the worst when it comes to anthropomorphism. I'm so guilty. I'm well aware. I also know I'm not alone in this, but I'm also aware of how important it is to not assign human emotions to animals, especially wild animals, even though it's a constant battle. We're not judging.
I think the anthropomorphism reinforces a human-centric worldview, which is obviously we as humans have a human-centric worldview. I mean, that comes naturally to us. Mm-hmm. But it's the idea that everything in the world is somehow related to us or should be understood through our experience. But the simple truth is the natural world is full of creatures and processes that exist absolutely independently of us with their own intrinsic value.
Yeah, it's that idea of if you, say for example, if you hit a deer while driving, which around here is usually the end game for both the deer and the vehicle. And people will get annoyed. But I always feel like, well, we're driving through their home. They're not running through our road. We're driving through their home. You know what I mean? It's kind of that,
of course,
how you see the world and your place in it versus theirs. Yeah.
So while anthropomorphism can make animals and nature feel way more relatable, and I think that's also important, it's equally important to remember that other species have their own ways of being that don't necessarily match up with our human experience. You will understand why we wanted to make this point very clear once we get to our stories. Another thing that is very important to us is the cute animal videos. We all share them and we all go, aww, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I love them. I just want to urge you to always think about what you see in the video before you share. I don't know. Annie, do you remember? I don't want to make you upset, but I'm sure it was like 20 years ago, there was a video that went absolutely viral. It was a dog, and the dog was panting and crying. And the video claimed that the dog was lying on his owner's grave, grieving. And so many people all around the world believed that. And later, it was revealed that the dog had actually been choked before the video, so just that he would be absolutely distressed. And we are very much judging anyone who would harm an animal in any way for attention, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And we do know that dogs don't cry emotional tears. Dogs grieve, of course, but they express it differently than we do. Another example I have are these videos that seem to be super popular at the moment, or at least have been over the last couple of years, where you see like poodles and they're dressed up in some cute outfits and they're walking on their back legs and they're carrying stuff like a backpack or they're riding on a scooter. And it's not cute in my opinion if you know how these dogs get trained and treated. And I think we all agree that animals in circuses used to be a horrible thing. And we are happy that it's outlawed in many places today. It is, for example, here in Austria. But these videos are basically the same thing, just online. And as I said, I love animal videos. But I love things that are captured, for example, with wildlife cameras or cats and dogs doing derpy stuff. Basically videos that are authentic and are most likely not faked.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And if you want to see, highly trained dogs doing funny stuff, watch Crufts, heel work to music, You can train your dog to do lots of fun things without harming them.
And dogs do the funniest thing anyway, all day long.
They do.
Like just,
Yeah.
set up a camera, something funny is gonna happen.
Yeah.
I'm getting off the soapbox now. I just had the feeling if we're talking about a lot of animals and animal-human relationships, for example, we have to make these points a little bit clear.
Yes.
Now let's enjoy some nice stories.
Yes. So I'm going to start with the first story, and this is the story of a man and a crocodile who had a bond so profound that it spanned over 2 decades. Let's dive into the story of Chito and Pocho. It's the late 1980s in Costa Rica, and a fisherman named Gilberto Shedden, known to his friends as Chito, is making his way along the Reventazon River. Now, Chito wasn't just any fisherman, he was also a naturalist and a man with a deep love for all living creatures. So when he comes upon a 5 meters long crocodile, which is like almost 20 feet, no, 15 feet. Right? 3 feet to a meter, roughly, I think. Yeah, so about 15-foot long crocodile. And it's lying listlessly, kind of helpless. It's not looking good on the riverbank. And his immediate reaction is to go take a closer look at what was going on. The crocodile, who would later be known as Pocho, was in really bad shape. He was emaciated, dehydrated, and gravely injured. A local farmer had shot him in the head trying to protect his cattle. It was a miracle that Pocho was still alive, but rather than just leaving him to his fate, Chito decided to help. Can we just say that's very brave, because we always try to help everything, but that large of a crocodile? So Chito, with the reluctant help of a few friends, can you imagine calling people and being like, hey, you know how I helped you move your couch last month? So I've got this couple 100 pound of messed up crocodile. No, thank you. But they do. They show up and they carefully load him into the boat. And Chito knew he couldn't just leave Pocho there to die. And so he took him home. And over the next 6 months, Chito dedicated himself to nursing the crocodile back to health. He'd talk to him and pet him, and what can we say? Chito was successful, and Pocho actually recovered. And now you might think, well, that's nice. This is where that story ends. Chito helped the crocodile get well, and then they parted ways. But no. Once Pocho had regained his strength, Chito did what any responsible naturalist would do, and he brought him back into the wild. But Pocho was not interested in the wild. He would just constantly show up at Chito's house again and chill out on his porch. With special permission from the Costa Rican authorities, Chito was allowed to keep Pocho. And this is kind of significant, and it impressed me because a trip to Costa Rica really changed the way I look at pets. About 10 years ago, my family and my husband's family went together on a Panama Canal cruise. And my late great mother-in-law, Valerie, and I visited this jaguar rescue center in Costa Rica. Mostly, they have monkeys, sloths, and birds and reptiles there that were all part of the illegal pet trade. Costa Rica has some of the toughest pet and animal welfare laws around, really, really strict. Basically, the way I understand it is that if you want a pet and you live in Costa Rica, you can have a dog or you can have a cat. But anything else, including things I myself have owned as pets, like iguanas or tree frogs, and then of course things like parrots and other exotic birds, all of those are off limits. They very much want people to stop trapping their wild animals and then breeding them in captive breeding programs for the pet trade. I also had a really interesting conversation with another woman from Canada who was on the trip with us, and she actually has a whole bunch of rescue parrots. And we had such an interesting conversation about why parrots really are difficult pets, and the whole thing just really made me think very differently about the way I am one of those people who would very much like to have everything as a pet. You know what I mean? And it just really kind of made me think a little bit differently about the way I personally view animal companions, and I think that the whole episode is going to get more into that, but Costa Rica really takes animal welfare very seriously. So this is a big deal, them saying that, yeah, it's okay, he can keep this very wild animal with him. And so that's how Pocho becomes part of Chito's family. He wasn't just a pet, he was friend. And over time, Chito trained Pocho to respond to his name, and the two spent countless hours together swimming, playing, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was a relationship built on trust, mutual respect, and an undeniable connection. In fact, Chito apparently spent so much time with Pocho that at one point his wife had enough and left. But Chito was like, quote, there are many women, but just one Pocho. That's fair. I mean, I don't know what to say about that. He's not wrong. Tourists, scientists, and even skeptics from around the world flocked to Costa Rica to witness this unbelievable friendship. Every Sunday afternoon, Chito and Pocho would perform in this specially built lake, showcasing their friendship to captivate audiences. Pocho, a crocodile, remember, crocodiles also have more testosterone than alligators, and so crocodiles can be quite aggressive. And so he had this very unique way of greeting Chito whenever he entered the water. He would rush at him with his mouth wide open, like, I'm going to eat you, I'm going to eat you. And then he'd just stop short, closing his jaws gently and allowing Chito to give him a kiss on the snoot. Can you imagine? I mean, it sounds like a dream. It sounds like if, and I don't mean to generalize, but it sounds like the way I dream of being Snow White and having animals land on me and visit me in the forest. It sounds like a very manly version of that. Do you know what I mean? Like a very testosterone-y version of the Snow White dream. So for many, the kissing him on the nose, this was just this ultimate display of trust in one another. And some experts speculated that the bullet wound to Pocho's head probably damaged his brain and made him more docile, and I would probably agree with that. But Chito believed it was something much deeper and that the crocodile loved him. Sadly, after more than 2 decades of companionship, Pocho passed away on October 12, 2011. His death was a profound loss, not just for Chito, but for everyone who had been touched by their story. Hundreds of people attended Pocho's funeral, which was a testament to the impact this incredible crocodile had on the world. Chito sang to him one last time, holding his hand, and bid farewell to his beloved friend. Before you get too sad, don't, because Pocho's legacy lives on. He was taxidermied, and his remains are on display. Don't worry, you can still go see him. He's on display at the museum in Siquirres, Costa Rica, where Chito visits often. And while Chito has since befriended another crocodile, who he's named Pocho 2, the bond he shared with the original Pocho was something truly special and something that might never be replicated. And this is where our discussion about anthropomorphism comes in. Because, obviously, the biggest takeaway of this story is that every life has value. And if there's a living being in need, you should always try to help. But it's equally important to remember that a crocodile is a wild animal. This is a predator, and we are not living in a Disney movie. Crocodile's gonna crocodile. That's just how it goes. But Johanna and I watched this really good video. It was like a quick YouTube video of a couple who work with reptiles, and they debunked the Chito and Pocho story. And it's sort of just reinforcing sort of the things that we have said. And we'll share that in our sources. It was an interesting take on it. Don't get us wrong, it's still a wonderful story of compassion and an incredibly unusual bond. But it's not really as easy a case as, oh my God, the crocodile was so thankful for being rescued, and he loved the fisherman. He would never have hurt him, because if something had happened to trigger Pocho or startle Pocho, or if Pocho had missed a few meals, he absolutely would have eaten the man who loved him so much. And that's part of it, right? Just because you know these things, it doesn't mean we want to stop working with them. Look at Siegfried and Roy, right? I used to have an iguana that I loved desperately. I loved my frogs too, but you're not really supposed to handle frogs. They're more like fish. They're more like look but don't touch. But my iguana, I held a lot. And so my iguana, I'd had him from when he was tiny. And he used to sit on my shoulder. He'd climb up me and sit on my shoulder or go behind my hair and drape around my neck. He was an absolute sweetheart, but he didn't love me. I brought him his favorite foods. I had a significantly warmer body than he did, so he liked to put his cold-blooded little belly against the back of my neck and warm up. You know, I'm the person that treated and got rid of his mites. I gave him the nice treats. I filled the tub so he could swim, and I used to take him to the beach on a leash so he could swim. I was the bearer of good things. And so, just like Pocho and Chito, he was happy to chill out with me and just have all of his needs met, you know? I named him Romeo because I was a lit major writing a paper when I got him, but I was not his Juliet, you know? I ended up rehoming him to a kid who had this insane setup for him in a Florida room. It was like a cage bigger than my living room. So it was the right thing to do. And I think about him, though, all the time and just wonder, is he still alive? He'd be over 20 now. But I know he doesn't miss me. And you know what? It's okay. It's absolutely okay. I think we often forget that sometimes it's enough to be the one who loves. They don't have to love you back the same way. It's okay if you're just the one doing the loving, you know?
Yeah, I like that. I really like that.
Yeah.
I think that's a good takeaway. I think you're absolutely right.
We have so much love to give, you know, and it's okay if... Yeah. It's okay. Yeah.
All right, I would love to tell you about another friendship between a human and an animal. I want to talk about the incredible Jane Goodall and one of her most famous companions, the chimpanzee who started it all, named David Greybeard. Every one of us who had the absolute privilege to live with a beloved pet will know how deep the connection between humans and animals can be. But just like in the story of Pocho and Chito, forming this bond not with a domesticated dog or a cat, but with a wild animal is absolutely next level. And that's exactly what Jane Goodall did, and it changed the way we understand animals and basically ourselves forever. Now, who was she before she became the world's most famous primatologist? She was born in 1934 in Bournemouth, England, and from a very young age she was enamored with animals. She dreamed of traveling to Africa to live among wild animals, and in her early 20s she actually made this dream come true. Jane traveled to Kenya, where a friend of hers owned a farm, and she started to work as a secretary there. There, a chance meeting with the famed paleanthropologist Dr. Louise Leakey. Well, it wasn't that much of a chance meeting. I think she was very proactive in getting to meet him. So, because that was her dream, right? Anyway, it set her on a path that would absolutely redefine primatology. Leakey really liked her, and he saw something in her, even though at that time she didn't even have a university degree. She hadn't studied yet. And he sent her to the Gombe Stream Game Reserve in Tanzania to study wild chimpanzees, which was an absolutely radical move at the time. As I said, Jane had no formal scientific training, but Leakey saw that as a strength, Without the constraints of academic conventions, Jane could observe the chimps with a very fresh perspective. And observe she did. Jane arrived in Gombe in 1960, and for weeks she barely saw any chimps. They were very elusive, but then there was this one chimpanzee with a distinctive patch of silver fur on his chin, hence the name Greybeard. Jane called him David Greybeard, and of course naming the objects of your study was a big no-no, especially at the time. Jane herself would later say, quote, "When in the early 1960s I brazenly used such words as childhood, adolescence, motivation, excitement, and mood, I was much criticized. Even worse was my crime of suggesting that chimpanzees had personalities. I was ascribing human characteristics to non-human animals and was thus guilty of that worst of ethological sins, anthropomorphism," end quote.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. I think this really shows that everything, including anthropomorphism, is not black and white, but it's just so much gray. Because of course animals have personalities. And also, we should point out that it just occurred to me. So, for example, we talk a lot about anthropomorphizing and being careful to not ascribe positive traits to animals and thinking, oh, it means they love us, it means they this. But it also means our last dog, Tucker, who we lost to cancer. And there was a question for a little bit near the end of his life where should we amputate his leg? This came up, right, with my 160-pound livestock guardian, Mutt, my baby. And one thing we learned that I thought was so interesting and is worth pointing out here is the vets were very clear to us that removing a limb from a dog or any other animal, for the most part, they don't dwell on the loss of things the way humans do. There's no grief or loss for a limb. They just sort of get up and they make the best of what they've got and they go forward. The reason we decided not to do that was because if we removed his leg, it would have only given us, at best, another 6 months with him. And we felt like that was too serious a surgery to put him through, despite the fact he wouldn't mourn the leg, you know what I mean. But it is worth pointing out that while we sometimes say, like, well, animals don't love the same way, and you think, oh, well, that's a bummer. But also, they don't mourn the same way. They don't grieve the same way. They don't get caught up in their heads about bullshit the way we do. You know what I mean? There's a lot to be said for not feeling these complicated human emotions. And once we get into some of these mammals, honestly, we're still learning so much about how smart they are and how emotionally smart they are and what they feel. It's just not the same as what we feel.
Exactly. And it's something I myself had never realized until we had the dogs.
Yeah.
For me, I always thought, well, a dog is a dog is a dog is a dog.
No.
But every dog, like, yeah, they're really their own personalities with their own thoughts. But what you said is true. When we got the diagnosis of Jem, I was really upset. I mean, of course, I'm still upset,
yeah.
But we're managing. And Philip said exactly the same. He said, but he doesn't feel sorry for himself the way we would feel sorry for ourselves. He just manages and he just goes on with it. Yeah,
I've never seen a wild thing sorry for itself, right? They don't. They live in the now, don't they? They live very much in the now. And we could all take a lesson from that, that's for sure.
Anyway, so David was the first chimp to lose his fear of Jane, the first to let her into the world of the Gombe chimps. And this wasn't just a superficial connection. David Greybeard was pivotal in breaking down the barriers between species. Because David didn't just tolerate Jane, he actively engaged with her. He was the first chimpanzee she observed using tools, an act that would shatter the notion that tool use was uniquely human. I mean, nowadays we know that even crows use tools and make art. I think everyone who listened to our episodes about the crows knows this now.
Mm-hmm.
Jane saw David fishing for termites with a blade of grass, an observation so groundbreaking that when Jane reported it to Leakey, he famously said, quote, "Now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as humans," end quote. Just think about that. In one moment, a chimpanzee using a simple tool blurred the lines between human and animal, forcing us to rethink our place in the natural world. And it all started with David Greybeard. He introduced Jane to the other chimps, bringing her deeper into their society. Through him, Jane learned that chimps have emotions, personalities, and even a social structure that isn't so different from our own. They grieve, they form alliances, they even hold grudges, traits we used to think were absolutely uniquely human. And not to be a downer, but every time people say, oh, animals are better than humans because they are not cruel or they don't kill their own. With all respect, I have to mention that nowadays we know that chimpanzee groups or communities actually do engage in violent conflicts with other groups, including fighting and killing members of rival communities. This is often referred to as wars or raids, and typically occur when a group of male chimpanzees from one community invades the territory of a neighboring community. And these raids can be highly coordinated and involve stealth and ambush tactics. Why do they do that? Well, same reasons humans fight wars: to expand territory, to gain access to resources such as food or mates, or simply to eliminate rivals. And one of the most famous documented instances of this behavior is the so-called 4-Year War, and this was actually observed by Jane and her team in the 1970s. During this period, a once unified chimpanzee community split into two groups, and the larger group systematically hunted down and killed members of the smaller group until it was effectively exterminated. That is a downer.
Yeah, that's kind of a bummer.
No, but it just shows that we are not so different from them, and they are not so different from us, and there is cruelty.
Oh, yeah,
in their world as well.
dolphins.
Yeah.
A lot, again.
Dolphins,
yeah. A lot of animals, a lot of cute animals. It's like pandas are terrible parents. Terrible parents.
It's true.
Like, terrible. Don't let a panda ever babysit your child. Don't do it. Terrible.
Kangaroos are brutal.
Oh, I had no
totally fuck you
idea
up.
until we started this podcast and got so many incredibly cool Aussie listeners that kangaroos want to hurt you. I had no idea. They're terrifying. Terrifying.
Anyway, we promise that this is a feel-good episode. I'm sorry that I had to bring this up, but that's always the argument I have when people are trying to tell me that it's just humans who are cruel. Everything is cruel and everything is good.
Mother Nature is
in a grave.
Yeah, very mean.
I feel bad now for not fully delivering on the feel-good promise.
It's fine. It just gets more sad as we go. Keep going. They'll be fine.
So one of my favorite stories is how David would comfort his friend Goliath by gently placing a hand on his head when he was distressed. This is such a simple act, yet it kind of speaks volumes about the emotional depth of these chimpanzees, of these animals. David Greybeard wasn't just a chimp, he was a pioneer, he was kind of a diplomat, and in many ways a teacher. And he showed Jane, and in that way also us, that the differences between the species are smaller than we might think, and that with patience and understanding we can bridge even the widest gaps. David Greybeard isn't just a footnote in Jane Goodall's life, he's a symbol of her revolutionary approach to science. By Jane refusing to devalue the chimp's emotional range and cognitive abilities, she saw them as individuals with personalities and lives worth understanding. And that's what made her work so groundbreaking. Jane's observations didn't just challenge the scientific status quo, they upended it. She showed the world that the line between human and animals isn't as clear-cut as we'd like to think. Her work at Gombe didn't just contribute to our understanding of chimpanzees, it reshaped our understanding of ourselves and pretty much everything around us. But Jane's story doesn't end there. In the decades since her time with David, Jane has transformed from a pioneering scientist into a fierce advocate for conservation and animal welfare. After witnessing the destruction of chimpanzee habitats firsthand, she shifted her focus to preserve the natural world that David and his descendants call home. She founded the Jane Goodall Institute, established refuges for chimp rescued from medical research, and launched Roots and Shoots, which is a global youth program encouraging young people to take action for the environment, animals, and their communities. Today, I had to look it up, Jane is in her 90s and she's still traveling the world. She's still being invited to universities to talk to people. She's still spreading the message of hope and urging us all to live in harmony with nature and to respect all life. And if a chimpanzee can step outside his comfort zone to engage with a different species, I'm sure we can step outside ours to connect with those who are different from us. We are currently in a world that sees a lot of divide, Maybe it's always been a world that sees a lot of divide, but it wasn't just so obvious as it is nowadays. And maybe David Greybeard's story can remind us that connection is possible.
Absolutely. All right, now how about an unusual friendship between two animals of different species? I think we've all seen news reports or videos of animals from different species form bonds. I'm really hoping we have a good post in the Facebook group after this episode where people share all their favorite, interspecies, just happy animal stuff. I think almost everyone who has both a dog and cat at home will have good stories about interspecies relationships, but sometimes these friends are so unlikely that you just can't help but wonder, how did this happen? And there are several reasons why interspecies friendships can form. Of course, one of the biggest reasons, especially in the human-animal friendships, is domestication. I don't think we have to explain too much about domestication. Humans have been domesticating animals for thousands of years, turning wild wolves into loyal dogs, feral cats into purring, rat-hunting lapwarmers, and wild horses into majestic companions. Of course, these animals have learned to adapt to our lives, to our mutual benefit, and sometimes they even adapt to each other. Hence, cats and dogs that are best friends. That's a classic example of how domestication has laid the groundwork for interspecies friendship. They share the same space, the same humans, and over time, they form an unexpected bond. But what's a friendship without communication, right? Whether it's verbal or nonverbal, communication is key. Think about your dog barking to get your attention or a cat meowing for food. It's all part of interspecies communication.
Didn't cats start meowing and crying to trigger human reactions? They made it sound like baby crying. They copied like baby crying.
I believe that's correct. I don't think cats really talk to each other. Dogs do. Dogs bark and back and forth, but cats I don't think do that. I think they just pretty much do it to sound like babies so that we will... And it works.
Or the muscles that dogs grew over the last 10,000 years that they were with us to make their face appear more baby-like.
Yes.
Whenever needed.
Puppy face.
Yeah.
Beanie is so good at that, man. Oh.
Gem, too.
Yeah. Her ears go back, all the way back, and she looks down, but then her head goes down, but her eyes go up, so they're big beagle pools of houndy sadness, and you'll just give her your soul. It's fine. Yeah. In the wild, animals have their own ways of chatting it up. Some species of monkey, like the West African Diana monkey and Campbell's monkeys, actually understand each other's alarm calls. When one monkey hears danger, the other knows exactly what's going on. It's like they've got their own emergency broadcast system happening. And this kind of communication often leads to mutual protection, and you guessed it, interspecies friendships. Now let's talk about mutualism, nature's version of a win-win. A well-known example, one of our favorites, is a coyote and badger teaming up to hunt ground squirrels. They each bring something to the table, and they both walk away with a full tummy, right? Win-win. Over time, these kind of partnerships can evolve into something that looks a lot like friendship. The same goes for humans and our pets. We give them food, shelter, love. They give us loyalty, companionship, and in some cases, some extra protection. It's a classic case of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Or in this case, maybe you keep the burglars away and I'll keep the kibble coming. And just to be clear, I do wonder if that coyote and badger are friends. I think they love each other. I know they don't. I know I just explained why they don't, but I still feel like maybe they do. And I feel like this is the problem, right? This is what we all... It's... How do we know they don't love each other? What if the badger shows up and the coyote's not there? Is he sad?
I think we can't know that yet.
I know.
Just think about all the things we learned over the last 20 years when it comes to animals and their emotions. I think there's still so much we don't know. So I would never say they don't love each other. I think they love each other. Their bond is different from what we understand.
True.
With love.
True.
But on the other hand, a dog produces oxytocin when he looks at his human.
That's right. So we know they love us. Yeah.
It's just they express it differently. They maybe feel it differently.
Yeah.
There was this case in Sweden where over 10 days they kept seeing a female wolf and a male brown bear just strolling through the woods together.
Oh, I remember that.
What was up with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
hunting together, but 10 days, and they kept each other company.
Yep. I always find these, I just want to know more, I think. That's it. I think we all do, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to say, it's just incredibly touching when you see one species kind of looking out for another, isn't it? Like, we all hear stories of dogs guarding babies or animals adopting other species. It's like a built-in instinct to protect the vulnerable, and sometimes it crosses species lines, like the case of a ram protecting a blind cow or a steer standing guard over a blind mule. You know, these are things that have actually happened, and they didn't just coexist, they actively took on the role of a protector. And we're seeing this also now in the oceans, aren't we, with humpback whales are being shown to do protective behavior. And so this is where some of the strongest interspecies bonds are formed. It's not just survival of the fittest. It's interesting when animals are altruistic and you have survival of the kindest, right? And finally, we can't forget the power of play. Social bonding is a huge part of why these friendships form. Play is universal. It's fun, it's interactive, and it's a great way to communicate. Whether it's humans playing fetch with their dogs or dolphins and humans playing together in the ocean, play breaks down barriers and it builds trust. It's through these playful interactions that deeper bonds are forged, turning simple acquaintances into true friends, no matter the species.
You know, when I realized that play really is universal, when this video was shared of the fox, a very young fox, finding dog toys in a garden and started playing with the dog toys.
Yep, coyote pups too. Before we fenced in the yard, we would see the coyote puppies. We used to have a trail cam in the back, and they would sometimes find like one of the dog toys in the way back there, and they'd be bouncing around with it, and yeah, really cute.
So interesting. And that's what I mean. I think there's still so much to learn, and we're still gonna see so much science coming up with understanding more things about animals.
Totally.
We're not done yet. I think I told you all the story of the crows trying to scare a friend and me, and how highly entertained they were and how they were playing kind of with each other and laughing at us.
It's such a good story.
But I also once witnessed a crow playing with a dog, not ours, but it was at a doggy park, and the crow would sit on the fence, and every time this one dog came running up, the crow would fly a couple of meters and then wait for the dog to run up again. And it was so highly entertaining to watch. Like, it went on for minutes.
I love that. I love watching dogs play with other animals. I just hope Opus has learned his lesson about playing with skunks, but probably not, because he went back for seconds and then thirds. Like, the skunk would like spray him and then spin around and charge him, and he'd like back up real fast, but his tail's wagging like a lunatic the whole time, apparently. And then he ran back to the skunk, got sprayed a second time. He got sprayed like 3 times in the face. He's like, okay, let's be friends. Nope, still no. And then we had a situation when Opus was a baby that we had to nip in the bud super early on, because he was at the very back of the yard and he was racing back and forth along the chain link fence. And on the other side of the chain link fence was a coyote that was racing back and forth. So he was playing with a coyote on the other side of the fence. And it was the cutest freaking thing. But it was like, oh, buddy, no, you can't. We got to nip this in the bud. Like, I know you guys are relatives, distant relatives, but let's keep the coyotes on the other side. And our late great dog Tuck used to sit out in the snow, and birds would land on him and snuggle in for warmth, and they'd pluck his undercoat and fly away with it. But he was also a serial killer who took out no fewer than 4 chipmunks. But he was fine with birds, obviously. But speaking about birds and dogs, how about the story of a dog's best friend being a magpie? Because that sounds like something out of a Disney movie, and it's my very favorite bird. But it really happened to a Staffy named Peggy and a magpie named Molly. This happened in Australia in 2020. A couple, Juliet Wells and Reese Mortensen, are out for a walk with their adorable English Staffordshire Terrier Peggy in Upper Coomera on the Gold Coast. It's just your average dog walking day until they spot a baby magpie all alone on the ground. No parents in sight, just this tiny little, vulnerable little fluffy bird. And being the good-hearted people they are, they try to reunite the magpie with its family, but they can't find it. So what do? They bring it home, of course, because who wouldn't want to nurse a wild magpie back to health? And this is where it gets interesting. At first, Peggy, the lovable Staffy, was like, what is this feathery thing in our house? But soon enough, something amazing happened, and Peggy, in true motherly fashion, became a surrogate mom to the baby bird. And what do the dog and a magpie do all day? Well, according to Juliet, their favorite activity is sunbathing together. Peggy sprawls out in the sun, and Molly spreads her wings wide, soaking up the rays. They also play ball, snuggle, and basically just hang out like old friends. And when Peggy had her own litter of puppies, Molly was right there keeping an eye on the new additions, like the protective winged auntie she's become. It's this big, happy multi-species family. And so in today's world, what do? When you've got an adorable, heartwarming story, you share it on Instagram, obviously. And Peggy and Molly's antics have won almost 1 million followers around the globe. We don't know them. We just like their account. We both like them.
Not. Yeah. We just looked at their account.
That's right. And as for Molly, she's a wild bird at heart. They have never caged her. She is free to come and go as she pleases. Sometimes she'll take off for a while, hang out with other birds, but she just always comes back to her best friend, Peggy. You can follow Peggy and Molly's shenanigans on Instagram at Peggy and Molly. And I think there's a book out now.
Yeah. It's adorable. The whole account is adorable. And they have 1 million followers, so there is money made. And I talked before about videos, but I think as long as the animals are not being forced to do anything, as long as they are treated well and are well taken care of, and the most important part, this is a wild bird. As long as Molly truly is free to come and go as she pleases, I think I prefer someone making a living by sharing these videos and photos of adorable animals, putting something good out into this world, than someone making billions by selling us crap we don't really need. And I don't know, that will only end up in a landfill anyway. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, yeah.
Okay, now I want to end this episode with the story that kind of started it all for us. A story that sadly made international headlines this week, and I said it in the beginning, there may be tears.
Yeah.
I was shedding tears every time I talked about these two friends this week, and of course, it's the story of Magic and Sphen. They were two penguins who captured the world's heart as the same-sex power couple, and they became icons of equality, love, and dedication. Now let me preface all of this by saying, we don't really know if they were homosexual penguins. They could have been bisexual or asexual, whatever. No matter what, they were definitely atypical. And what matters is that they became a symbol and an example of the often overlooked fact that homosexuality has been observed in over 1,500 species, spanning mammals, birds, insects, and even fish and reptiles. And of these 1,500, detailed, well-documented studies exist for about 500 species, indicating that homosexual behavior is widespread and a natural phenomenon in the animal kingdom. I know a lot of people don't want to hear it, but it's a fact.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite responses when people are like, it's unnatural. I'm like, I'm sorry, you need a different... Like, you can feel however you want to feel, but if you're going to give logic to back up your feelings, then they have to be factual, and that's not one.
Yeah, and it can include a range of activities such as courtship, pair bonding, yes, sexual activity in some species like bonobos, for example, and even long-term same-sex partnerships, similar to what is observed in heterosexual relationships.
Yeah.
Now let's rewind to 2018. That's the year that Sphen and Magic first met at the Sea Life Sydney Aquarium. I've been there several times, back when I was a flight attendant. Very interesting. These two Gen 2 penguins, Gen 2, that's the kind of penguin they are, they were a part of a colony of 33 penguins, but it didn't take long for the staff to notice something very special between them. Penguins are apparently famously monogamous, and Sphen and Magic were no exception, except for the fact that they were interested in each other and not the other female penguins. They courted in the classic Gen 2 penguin way, which is bowing.
Very gentlemanly gentlemen.
They exchanged pebbles, which is the ultimate penguin love token, and singing to each other. And when breeding season rolled around, they took their relationship to the next level by building the most impressive nest in the colony. I mean, it's always easy for dinks, so double income, no kids, to have amazing houses. Let's be real.
Dinky penguins. I was going to make a comment about the gay community always bringing up property values around the country, but I didn't want to stereotype. But you know everyone was impressed by that nest. That nest was built to impress.
Yeah, the aquarium staff was pretty impressed by this duo, so they decided to give Sphen and Magic a dummy egg to see if their parental instincts were as strong as their relationship. And spoiler alert, they absolutely nailed it. These two were so good at incubating the dummy egg that the staff decided to let them foster a real one. And on a Friday in October 2018, Sphen and Magic welcomed their first chick, baby Svenchik, later named Lara.
My best friend's name.
Svenchik is also kind of
I
cute.
love Svenchik. Sphen and Magic. Oh.
And because they were so great at raising Lara, the internet was interneting, and their story quickly went viral, obviously.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want to see that?
Oh, it's just so much joy.
Yeah. What started as a beautiful love story between two penguins soon became a symbol of something much bigger. Just a year before Sphen and Magic met, same-sex marriage had been legalized in Australia. So when these two penguins started raising a chick together, they became unexpected icons of the LGBTQ+ community. They even inspired a float at the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras parade and made their way into school curriculums and a Netflix show. I think the Netflix show is called Atypical, actually. And while some naysayers tried to downplay their relationship, saying they were just friends, anyone who saw the way they cared for each other knew better.
They're just friends. It's like, I feel like a lot of people in our generation, I hope it's changing. I hope our generation's like the last generation that's got like an aunt or an uncle who just lived with their best friend and roommate for 40 years, or 50 years. They were just really good friends. They were just friends who lived together for 60 years.
Now, Sphen and Magic were a real-life love story that transcended species and touched hearts around the world. But, as all great love stories go, this one also comes with heartbreak. Sphen's health began to deteriorate, and despite the absolute best efforts of the aquarium's veterinary team, Sphen's condition worsened, and they made the tough decision to help him cross over the Rainbow Bridge to end his suffering. Before they said their final goodbyes, the staff brought Magic to Sphen's side, allowing him to understand that his partner wouldn't be coming back, which is so important, and I just love that they were so mindful of that.
Yeah.
And here's the part that keeps getting me every time I think about it. When Magic said goodbye to Sphen, he began singing, and the entire colony of 45 penguins joined in, and they created this chorus of farewell for Sphen. Anyone who still thinks that animals have no feelings and no thoughts and no complex emotional and cognitive abilities must live in a complete different reality from mine.
Yeah, now I'm crying about Sphen again. Ugh, poor Magic. Ugh, now I'm crying again. Yeah, I was going to say animals are people too, but that's basically what we spent the last hour trying to dissuade people of, so I'm not going to say that. Something good?
Should I start with my something
Please. Good? I'm still crying, sorry.
So, my something good this week is everyone out there trying to help animals, trying to better their environment, trying to better understand animals and their world. I have a story of a marten that I'm not sure I shared with our listeners already, but it's too long for today, so I will tell it another time. Please let me know if you want to hear it and if I already told it or not. But it basically involves a wildlife sanctuary, and thank you to everyone working at such places. And I really say that with all my heart.
Agreed. That's my something good. Thank you to every single person listening who has taken the time out of their life to make the life of an animal better, even at the cost of your own heartbreak. Often at the cost of your own heartbreak.
I'd say almost always.
Yeah, from the wildlife sanctuaries and certified rehab people, and just people like us who just do our best with what we have when we find ourselves in that situation, Just thank you to everyone who spends time and energy and emotion and often money trying to make the world a better place for all the living creatures in it.
I know we have a lot of animal
lovers,
friends and lovers and really people who care about animals in our listener group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We sure do. I'm curious to hear about their Tell us about your interesting experiences with animals.
Yes.
We want to hear about it all. All right.
All right. I think that's it. If you enjoyed this episode, any of our other episodes, please do us a huge favor. Go to your podcast app, leave us a rating and a review. Thank you to everyone who leaves comments on Spotify. It's like every week we get so many comments under each episode. It's always a joy to read, almost always a joy to read them.
Yeah.
No, it's always a joy to read them. Comments on YouTube. Brandy Jean, I'm looking at you. Please join our Facebook group.
Our website is freshhellpodcast.com, and that will tell you links to all the other stuff that you might be interested in. Where our merch is, where our Patreon is, how to get in touch with us, our P.O. Box. Our email is freshhellpodcast@gmail.com. I think that's it, right?
I think that's it. Please tell all the animals out there we said hi.
Yeah.
All of them are important in the ecosystem. Everything is allowed to live in my garden, and I know in Annie's as well.
That's right.
They're just doing what they're doing. Be kind to them. Be kind to your fellow human being as well. They matter too. And you matter as well, so be kind to yourself.
And if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.